could just sit tight with us here for a couple of minutes while we wait for some more of our participants to join us. Everybody's coming into the meeting right now. We'll go ahead and get started in about 2 more minutes. Righty, we're going to go ahead and get started. You are sitting in on Chia's webinar, Homeschooling in the Church. This is specifically intended for pastors and church leaders who are considering having a homeschool group in their church. Before we go too much further, though, into it and I start introducing our speakers, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about CHIA of California, or Christian Home Educators Association of California. Angela, if you can go ahead and advance the slide. So I'll tell you a little bit more about CHIA's mission. As I said earlier, my name's Rebecca. I'm CHIA's general manager, and I've been working with CHIA for many, many years. So I know our mission inside and out. Now, our mission can be summed up in 3 P's. The first P is promote, to promote private Christian home education as a valuable and valid educational alternative to traditional school. We do this to the community around us. We do this through legislators and through media. The second P is provide. CHIA provides resources and training and support for families who teach their children at home. CHIA helps homeschoolers. Also, the last P is to protect. CHIA works to protect parents' God-given right to direct the education and upbringing of their children to the glory of God. And we do that advocating with our legislator and working with our partner organizations. So that's a little bit about CHIA and CHIA's mission. And I want to tell you a little bit more about what CHIA has going on this summer. As many of you know, and you've observed in the news, that all large gatherings have been canceled for the summer. That's exactly what happened to our annual convention, which was to be held in Anaheim. And so we instead are holding what we're calling our CHIA's Summer Series. We have a series of webinars following up with this webinar, Homeschooling in the Church, choosing your curriculum later this month, planning your school year, keeping your records, and these are for the homeschool parents. Other virtual events, our special needs conference for parents that are teaching their children at home who have learning differences. And then also college night, and that'll be the night that we talk about how to homeschool and prep for college, and we'll be introducing you to some wonderful colleges you might want to consider sending your children to. So those are the wonderful things we have coming up this summer. You can find out about it through our California Homeschool Conventions.com website. Now today we have a full couple of hours for you, hour and a half, 2 hours. First, we'll be having our speakers Brad Dacus and Jeff Byers. Then we'll be followed by some first steps on how to get started homeschooling. And then we have a panel of homeschool pastors and elders who can answer your questions. So first, I would love to welcome and just introduce our first speaker, Brad Dacus from Pacific Justice Institute, to you. Brad served as a legislative assistant to the U.S. Senator Phil Gramm, went on to receive his Juris Doctor from the University of Texas School of Law. Brad can be heard weekly on the Dacus Report on more than 170 radio stations across the country. His varied speaking opportunities include public debate and testifying before the United States House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. He's also testified numerous times before the California State Legislature on legislation affecting religious freedom and parents' rights. He was presented an honorary Doctorate of Religious Freedom and Family Rights degree from California Baptist University. Congratulations, Brad, in recognition of his commitment to faith and justice in his work protecting parental rights and religious freedom through the Pacific Justice Institute. And also followed by Brad will be Jeff Byers. He and his wife have been homeschooling for more than 36 years, and they've homeschooled their 5 children for more than 30 years, graduating their last child in 2019. Jeff is ordained minister since 1993, serving as a pastor of church plant in Adelanto before founding God's Word Church in the year 2000. Over the years, he and his wife have run homeschool support groups as well as founded 2 PSPs. They also serve on CHIA's Regional Advisory Board in the High Desert. But first, we're going to hear from Brad. CHIA specifically appreciates the work that you do, Brad, with Pacific Justice Institute, raising the awareness of the sex education dangers in public schools. And you've been ringing that clarion call that it's time to take Christians, it's time to take your children out of public school. And we appreciate the sense of urgency, and we believe that this is an important message. So Brad, I want to let you have a few minutes to just talk about how you came to this point and why you think it's so important that churches should have homeschool groups. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I appreciate so much what you do in CHIA. It's a fantastic organization, and I think it's a model for homeschooling organizations across the country. All that you do and so many people you impact. I started Pacific Justice Institute back in 1997 with the help of former U.S. Attorney General Ed Meese, and we've been working hard to build an organization that's committed to defending religious freedom, but also parental rights. And in particular, we've had a lot of challenges, of course, with the rights of parents being violated by social workers and empowering parents and families in that regard, but also with regards to public education, government education, really. It's really not controlled by the public. It's the government, the teachers' unions. And what we've noticed, while we've been advocates for parental rights to choose whatever they wish, because it's God's authority that God has given them, the responsibility, we nonetheless can't avoid what's going on in our government schools. In fact, we at Pacific Justice Institute have recently produced a video. In fact, it's going to be actually just released in the very near future. It's called Sex, S-E-X-X-X, Education Curriculum. And it talks all about the very explicit and vulgar sex material that's being presented in California government schools, charter schools, as a matter of statutory mandate. Even in supposed conservative school districts, relative conservative school districts. It's very explicit. It goes all the way down to the kindergarten level. It talks about, sexual orientation. It talks about transgender relationships. And it talks about it not from a biblical perspective, but from a fake news perspective, from a very false, misleading, deceptive perspective. It's very dangerous because if a child gives into the transgender lifestyle, over 70%, if just left alone, who have gender identity dysphoria, will work through it on their own by the time they reach adolescence. But if a child is encouraged and nurtured into this, the average transgender child will not live to see their 30th birthday because of depression and suicide. And that depression is not because of environmental factors, because it's just as high in the San Francisco area and what you call LGBTQ friendly communities as it is in more conservative communities. The bottom line also is that it's going to have tremendous spiritual ramifications. We're looking, folks, at a spiritual genocide. A spiritual genocide in the millions of children. Because what they are learning now in government schools is not congruent with what the Bible says in Christianity. They can't believe both. And that's why it's going to be extremely destructive spiritually. And it's not just California. This curriculum has already been adopted in 17 other major school districts outside of California, including the Fort Worth Independent School District or Unified School District in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So we realize that there's a crisis. A lot of parents and families have been able to homeschool, and you have one day, your dad works, mom stays at home. That works. But for many, it's not going to work because you have a single parent family. They can't homeschool. She has to work. She has to provide for her family. Or you have both parents working in an area that has a high cost of living, i.e. the state of California and places like that are very expensive. So what do? Well, that's where the church comes in to play a key role in helping to minister and to provide alternatives. And it's very easy to do as far as from a legal perspective. It's not starting a private school. All you're doing is you're allowing, for example, you like homeschools, parents in your church to work together, form a homeschool consortium or co-op 2 days a week. And you have parents running it. And those 2 days you have instruction. You can have, someone teaching math, someone teaching this. They can be tutoring those 2 days. Now, you may be wondering, well, what about the other 3 days? Mom and both parents are working, or it's a single parent mom. She's working. What does she do with our children the other 3 days? And we've got some interesting options here. We have two major options that I'm really excited about. First is working with parents who do have a parent at home to work cooperatively with that parent across the street who has to work, and so that their son Johnny can go over to Billy's house, and Billy's mom's at home homeschooling. And those other 3 days, Johnny works with Billy and Billy's mom. It's working together with like the body of Christ has called us to do. That's very effective and legal. So you can do that. Another option is for churches to work together. So you have one church where you have the two teaching sessions, and another church that has 2 days of perhaps a study hall, if you will. So parents at that other school have like a study hall, and being able to, so you have a parent monitoring everyone. They're there, they're studying. You can have break time. They have their laptop. They're working on what they need to do. That way you can actually reach out much broader and much more expansive, and it's very legal. We have Pacific Justice. We'll work with you on that. Some of you may have concerns about your insurance policy and coverage. We'll be happy to talk to you about that. But the bottom line is this is a great opportunity. We have a short video we produced on our website at pji.org, pji.org, that can help you give a sort of overview of the concept of church homeschool co-ops. It's a great opportunity moving forward. A poll was recently taken. For those of you who may be wondering, well, I don't know if I really need to waste time on this. A poll was recently taken from Real Clear Politics, and it found that 40%, 40, not 41, but 40 or 39, 40% of all parents surveyed with children right now say that they are likely or leaning towards homeschooling next year. 40%. That's huge. We could see a huge saving of massive numbers of children from government schools. Many of these parents, mind you, are thinking about just having the government school program through the internet at home. And that'll give some parental review, but it's not the same with a really high quality education without a secular humanist indoctrination, which they're still required to put in. It's still going to be in the material, the radical LGBTQ agenda, and it's going to be all the way down. So because it's mandated by law. But these parents are going to be homeschooling. Now we can show them something even better, where they don't have to be at home alone all the time, the child by themselves, and somehow the parents trying to figure out how to make it work. No. Instead, that child can be at a church homeschool co-op. With churches are already there. The buildings are already built. The opportunity is there. And I really feel like this is the time for us not to be complacent. Those children will be on us if we don't speak up, if we don't do what I believe just about every church in America that is a Christian church, a church that believes in the Bible. I mean, a real true Christian church that believes what the Bible says and follows the Word of God. If those churches step up, we can see an incredible revival just within our children alone on a massive scale. I hope you get this picture. Now, we at Pacific Justice don't only give advice. I also want to share with you something too, real quickly. We provide free legal counsel. We have 10 offices in 6 states across the country: Oregon, Washington, California, Nevada, Colorado, and an office that serves New York City, New York, and New Jersey. And we have affiliate attorneys all across the United States. We'll do our work completely without charge. We'll go to bat for you. If you do this and you're in trouble, we will defend you without charge, and we'll pick up all the costs and all the expenses. That's our commitment to you. We right now have over 47 cases in litigation. None of them involve a church homeschool co-op, don't worry. But we have lots of cases. We have a lot of our attorneys are there. We're ready to serve you. And we don't just cherry pick high profile cases. We work hard to make sure we're very unique. We work hard to make sure that everyone gets help and gets the assistance that they need. There's also other organizations like HSLDA. I give them 5 stars, wonderful organization. And I'm sure they'll be there to serve you and help you as well. The bottom line is, now's not the time for us to cower. Now's the time for us to step up and to utilize our opportunities to reach out to children. Our legal resources at Pacific Justice Institute and our expertise and our past defense of homeschoolers, we're here unconditionally to provide you the support that you feel that you will need if you feel called and led to respond to this bell tolling, the bell tolling for our children. Now, I'd like to give this opportunity for you to listen to someone who I believe has some great insight moving forward. And I know you'll enjoy what he has to say. Jeff, it's on. Take it over.
All right, thank you, Brad. Getting my microphone working. Are you hearing me okay? I think I'm on. It shows I'm good. And so, yes, I really appreciate what you have to say, Brad, and appreciate what Pacific Justice Institute is doing here and getting the word out. We've been involved in homeschooling for a lot of years, as Rebecca said. I'm going to share my screen, get my presentation going here, and then I'll get on with my presentation. All right, very good. So I just want to say welcome to everybody that's out there listening to this. Maybe some of you are familiar with homeschooling. I'm sure there are. And maybe some of you are really don't know what it's about. You understand the issues and so forth of what we're dealing with. And so I'm going to talk about a number of things that are very important to us as Christians, as believers, because primarily what we're talking about here is private Christian homeschooling. There are different types of homeschooling. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, our history with homeschooling and our church goes back to, actually we began homeschooling before I was ordained as a pastor, before I was ministering, and we were involved with a support group. In fact, my wife came to lead that support group. And so it was a natural thing for us to incorporate that in with our church. Now, where we were at in our ministry was a very low income area. So there weren't a lot of families that would come in and be converted to homeschooling, but we had families, other Christians, believers that would come in to our support group for help. And we had the building, as Brad said. It's a wonderful opportunity to use the facilities that we have in order to just facilitate this and support families. And so we incorporated the support group, and then after that support group, we started a PSP, a private school satellite program founded within our church and under our church incorporation. And so we ran that until about 2006, when we were moving, and we handed it off to another family in our group. That group is still going strong. And then about 2009, we started our organization PSP Sports because we wanted to incorporate Christ in our sports and and the things that our children were involved with. And we got tired of the secular league saying, no, you can't pray before a practice or a game and all those kinds of things. And so we started our own. After that, it naturally gravitated into a co-op where we were providing other classes as well. We had people come alongside and work with us. And then last year we started a PSP, or private school satellite program, a school again. And so this is number 2 for us. So again, my wife, Carrie, runs most of that. I'm there as support and help and some of the technical things. And I just want to echo on what Rebecca said. Chia's goal is to support homeschooling and Christian homeschooling. And they've also had the goal of helping churches support private Christian homeschooling with a ministry to pastors at our conventions and so forth. And so this isn't something new for us. We realize the importance of involving the church and getting the church on board with what's doing, because parents can't homeschool alone. They need support of other parents and other organizations to help them with that task. All right, so the purpose of this webinar, we want to talk about homeschooling and what the church can do, but we also want to speak to the reality of the times. Obviously, there are a lot of things going on. A lot of parents are rethinking their choices of public school as their child's education. There's and I know Brad led to it, and there are others that are talking about the increase of contact and things that families or that organizations are receiving about private Christian home education. There's an article written by Michael Donnelly. He's with Homeschool Legal Defense. And there's, I have a resource sheet that you can contact us for that they will put out. But this is listed on that resource sheet of what's going on with the pandemic and all the social issues going on, and parents that are really looking at different opportunities now. And the reasons are varied for this. It might be a poor role model of either teachers or peers. I can remember last convention, we discussed, we met a family there that was looking into homeschooling, and their daughter was middle school age and dealing with gender issues. And there was a teacher that was coaching her. And so, they were very distraught and so forth. So we need to understand that we need to pray and find out what God would have us to do. But again, poor role models, the values that Brad mentioned that are being taught in sex education, gender issues, safety in the campuses and so forth. And really boils down to the separation of church and state, that God doesn't belong in our schools. It doesn't belong in our society. He belongs only in the church and only at home, maybe. And so those are some of the things. So I want to let pastors know or remind them of the opportunity of private Christian home education. And I want to talk about how private Christian homeschooling fits within the ministry of the church. So in other words, what can the church do to help? What role does the church play? Is this a viable option for Christian parents? And then two, I want, pastors need to think of the possibility of or the reality of private Christian homeschooling for your own family and having a support group. And so we're going to look at some of these things now. First, I want to address how we homeschool in California. And again, I'm using the word private Christian home education, and I'm using the word homeschooling or home education. So they are two different things, so I want to make that distinction. So in California, there are 4 options to where you can homeschool. The first is as a home-based private school, and that would be a family with their children, educating their kids at home and providing for that education solely by their family. The second option is with a private school satellite program. I've mentioned that before, PSP, and that's the acronym for private school satellite program. And I'll go into that a little later of what that means, but basically it's like an umbrella. Parents would gather and under this one organization that's a private school, and that private school would file with the state and take care of the business of the records and so forth. And then, but again, with a PSP, the parents are still doing that instruction at home. All right. And then number three, the options that California provides is a private tutor. And so you can hire a private tutor. I know we all have extra money lying around for that. That tutor has to be a certified teacher in the areas of study that they are teaching. And so then they can tutor your child. And there aren't very many of us that have the means to be able to do that. But that is one of the options that the California Ed Code provides. And then the fourth option would be for parents to enroll their students in a charter school or an independent study program through that charter school or through a public school. Now, the distinction there is that that is a public school. It's whether it's a charter or an ISP, it's a public school, and they have to follow the constraints of the Ed Code. Their materials have to be non-sectarian, non-denominational, and so forth. So, and then the other point I want to bring up on this slide is that there is a compulsory school age in the state of California, and it is from ages 6 to 18. And so, you know, a lot of our kids start kindergarten when they're 5 and so forth. Technically, you don't have to start their formal education at that point. It seems like more and more we see states and education systems trying to get our kids into the school system, preschool, all that, so much earlier on. And we have to be careful with that because of what is occurring there and the things that our kids are getting. All right, moving on, the requirements to homeschool in California. Basically, you have to file a PSA, which is a private school affidavit. That's with the state. It's done between October 1st and 15th. I'm just going to go through this real fast. Again, there's resources on that resource sheet of where you can get this online. Instructors must be capable of teaching. That's the definition. There's nothing that says you're certified, so parents do not need to be certified, and most parents are capable of teaching. They've taught their kids how to talk, how to walk, how to dress themselves, etc. And they're not going to be any worse off in educating their children in the academics, but really more importantly, spiritual aspect of things. So number 3, maintain a list of instructors with their addresses and qualifications. That's not something that you turn over to the state, although you do have an address that you file with your affidavit. Number 4, instruction must be in English, although there are exemptions for that. If their if the family's first language is not English. Number 5, provide instruction in course of studies that are commonly taught in the public school. And this is really simple. It's everything we would teach our children anyway, the things that we want them to learn: reading, writing, arithmetic, science, social studies, health, driver training. All of these things can be done within the home education school. And then number 6, maintain an attendance register or record. Number 7, maintain your course of study in our PSP. We require families to just write out what they're doing, what they're using for English, what they're using for math. And sometimes parents can set it up on their own curriculum, and with a compilation of different books. You just document that and you go with it. And then the final thing is maintain your health and immunization records or a personal beliefs exemption. And basically, we know that immunizations has been an issue for some families. All right, so let's talk about some reasons of why we homeschool. And Brad gave a lot of great reasons. And all you have to do is look in the news and see a bunch of more reasons. But, you know, we need to understand how everything works together. And so faith in America, we see a decline of a biblical worldview. A biblical worldview is just the way of thinking and behaving that's predominantly driven by acceptance of the Bible, the truths of the Bible, the precepts and the commands. A recent survey that was done and it's called American Worldview Inventory 2020. So it was done this year. And it was done by the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University under the leadership of George Barna. He's a veteran researcher for things concerning the church. And what they came up with is that only 6% of US adults have a biblical worldview today, this year. All right, and of those numbers, only 51% have a traditional view of God. In 1991, that number was 73%. 44% of people who profess belief in Jesus also believed he sinned. And what does that do to our doctrine of salvation and our hope of redemption and all of that? So, you know, there's some real issues here. 53% believe the Holy Spirit is only a symbol of God, not a living entity. All right, and then 56% of adults, this really got me, 56% of adults believe Satan as an influential spiritual being. Now, why that really jolted me is the fact that there's only 51% who believe in the existence of God. And so I have the quote on this slide that says, "Tens of millions of Americans consider themselves to be Christians, but do not believe that God is really in control or cares what happens to them." And so this is a real issue for us. This is a real issue in the challenge of raising our youth, you know, to understand who God is, have a relationship with him. I have a couple more slides related to this. The next one is a comment that I read from a Proverbs commentary by Warren Wiersbe. And what he wrote in this commentary on Proverbs is every local church is but one generation short of extinction. If we don't teach the next generation the truth of God, they may not have a church. And so the church today is, you know, well, I'm preaching the word from the pulpit. I'm teaching them. How come they're not getting it? And sometimes I have to wonder, is it the outside sources, the outside things that are impacting them? All right, another quote that I have for you, and this is really in regards to the impact of our public schools. And it was, the quote was given by Dr. Vodibach. I mean, he is, you know, he's a father and former pastor of Grace Family Bible Church in Texas, and he's now serving in Zambia as a dean of theology at African Christian University. And he is a conference speaker. He spoke just last year at our CHIA conference and has spoken many years. And he just has a dynamic desire to see the family disciple their children. And this is his comment: "We cannot continue to send our children to Caesar for their education and be surprised when they come home as Romans." And that is so true. That is so true. We need to do something different. We need to disciple our children, and homeschooling, private Christian homeschooling, where the parents are teaching their values throughout all of the curriculums, is one way of doing that. Is it always foolproof? No, but you know, what we're doing now is not working. And so you know, the whole point of this is that the church can help. The church can help support, right? So let's talk about validity of private Christian homeschooling. All right, so the responsibility for a child's education rests with the parents. The Bible tells us that, and even though the church teaches and trains, it's not their responsibility, it's still the parents. Even though the public schools teach and train, it's not their responsibility. It is still, the responsibility still lies with the parents for the education of their children. Just because we send our kids to Sunday school or to public school doesn't mean that we don't have to teach them. We're not responsible for their education. We are, and it's so important. All right, so do I have what it takes to homeschool? Many parents question their abilities and even the validity of private Christian homeschooling. I'm going to give you some more resources, but first I want to share this quote with you by Sam Sorbo. She is an actress and a radio host. She is a homeschool mom. Her husband, Kevin Sorbo, starred in the God's Not Dead movies. And this is what she says. She says, "We have to realize that God calls us to teach our children, but we are educated in a system that teaches us we are inadequate, and that's why parents feel they don't know how. But I'm here to tell you, not only can you, it's the most rewarding thing you can do as a parent, but the relationship you'll develop with your children because of it is beyond your wildest dreams." Now, she currently ministers to homeschoolers through a YouTube vlog, a YouTube channel called The Accidental Homeschooler. And she encourages parents and helps them to be their child's best teacher. So I encourage you to look that up. But there are so many resources for us to help in educating our children through private Christian homeschooling. So many resources to help families. And again, I'm going to continue to lay some of these out. But I want you to think about this. If God has called you to educate your children, and I pray that he has, I pray that you would seek him and ask him what you are to do. But if he's called you to do that, don't you think he will make the resources available for you to do that? All right, Brad came up with some great ideas of how families can help families, churches can help, and so forth. But God, I believe that God has called us to educate our children. I know he has, but has he called us to homeschool? And so if he's called us to educate our children, he will make a way. We need to teach our children that God belongs in everything. He belongs in history. He belongs in science. He belongs in math, the language arts, sports, everything that we do, not just Bible, not just learning about him. And so it's so important that we understand. All right, so let's talk about some more validation. There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Brian Ray, and he has put together an article. He actually has a website, and his website is NHERI, N-H-E-R-I. Again, it's on my resource sheet, and it stands for National Home Education Research Institute. Now, he publishes this article, I believe, annually. This was published March 23rd of this year, and it talks about the points of facts. It talks about reasons and motivation, why people homeschool. It talks about academic performance and how homeschool students do versus their public school counterparts. It talks about socialization, and that seems to be a big concern, which we've found totally unfounded through our many years of home education. It talks about gender differences in children and youth. Is that respected? And those types of issues we're dealing with in our society. And as Brad said, it's creating an environment that children, young people, they don't know who they are. And it breeds an uncertainty that really only God can fill. And so then he talks about success in the real world of adulthood and other general interpretations. So I encourage you, again, visit his website, NHERI.org, look at these things, and he's got a ton of, he's basically a ministry of research for homeschooling. All right. And so if you are wondering if home education could be for you, your family, or your church, this article does give validation. All right. And one final thing on validation that I want to talk about is, and again, this is another great resource, was a blog written by pastor and author James Emery White, and he writes, I believe to the core of my being that every parent who can, and not all can, should homeschool their children. There, I've said it, and I stand by it. Here are 7 reasons why. Again, get the resource sheet, and you can look that up and see why he thinks that homeschooling is a good thing. And it also just shows you some evidence of what homeschooling in their family, the results of it, and what it's done for them. And so it's just some great things. But the final point I want to make is that this is a spiritual battle for our youth. All right, this is a battle for our youth, and really what it boils down to is parents need to disciple their children. They're around them the most. They have those founding moments of influence in their early lives, and who loves them better than mom and dad? And we need to understand that parents need to be discipling their children. And it is the church's role to help in that area. It's the church's role to equip parents to do that task. And that's where a homeschool ministry will come in. And I believe with all my heart that a homeschool ministry will strengthen your church's ministry to the family. Fact is, every parent homeschools, all right? All right, so what is the role of the church in private Christian homeschooling? Well, first off, they need to be supportive from the pulpit. So what that means is for the pastor, if he's not a homeschooler, he's going to have to get some resources and figure out what that's about and understand. And hopefully what we're doing today will give you those resources that you can look up and find out about and find out if this is a valid ministry for your church. I believe it's valid. It's just a matter of deciding, is this something that we're going to do? And again, God will make a way, I believe with all my heart. And so you need to be supported from the pulpit. Talk about homeschooling and the value of it, and talk about what parents can do and how they can go about it and make things available for them. The next thing I have is start a support group. And what that means is the school would provide the church would provide maybe facilities, and maybe even people in your church ministry to help with these. Many times support groups are just run by the parents at homeschool. They're all volunteers, and that's typically the way we've done things. But what our church does with our PSB is we support in the areas of the church leadership and the incorporation and the insurance and things like that. But again, we have to have families, people come in and help. We can't do it all. And it's a volunteer ministry. All right, so in support group, what are they going to do? Well, there could be spiritual training, academic subjects, social skills, athletics, Christ-centered athletics, sports, field trips. And all of these things serve to bring families together in homeschooling and to show them that, hey, you're not alone. And if you have a question, you can ask other parents, what are you doing for this? How are you resolving that issue? How can I pray for you? And so it's invaluable. This truly, whether it's founded, whether a support group is located in a church or not, it's truly a parachurch organization. All right. The next thing that you can do is a PSP. Set up a private school where parents are the primary teachers of their own children. So Rebecca's going to go over how to start that and some of those things. But basically what you do is you provide an umbrella for the parents that want to educate at home. As a PSP, we have our guidelines of course of study and everything to help parents. We have the forms that they need and so forth. But again, in a PSP, the parents are the primary teachers of their own children. So you don't have to provide a teaching staff, but it's just a matter of helping parents and encouraging them even more so and giving them that option. Some parents are perfectly fine filing their own affidavit and educating on their own, but they still need a support group. All right, and then the next thing is you can provide both a support group and a PSP. They really do go hand in hand. And in fact, the church can incorporate parent training things, not only for the support group members, the homeschoolers, or the PSP members, but also for other church families that don't homeschool. And in many cases, that may draw them into this wonderful, wonderful opportunity to teach and disciple our children. And then finally, if you have an existing private day campus, consider incorporating a PSP along with that. PSP for parents that want to educate at home. All of these things are viable things that churches can do and a great support to the ministry of Christ. If you think about it, the fivefold ministry, it talks about all of those things, the apostles, pastors, teachers, all of those things are designed for encouraging and teaching those for the work of the ministry. What greater ministry than to our own children, amen? We have to do that, okay? Now, we've got your back. I want to talk about these organizations. Brad mentioned one, and I'm going to mention another one. These three organizations, we do work hand in hand, and there are other organizations, as Rebecca said, that we partner with. And so the first organization I want to talk about is HSLDA, Homeschool Legal Defense. They've been around for 35 years. They have specialized in things like research on homeschooling, courtroom hearings. They have developed connections with political allies and others. They have resources, incredible resources. We, in our PSP, require every family to be a member of Homeschool Legal Defense. That way, if there's any issues, the whole organization doesn't come down around us. And HSLDA, their primary focus is protecting homeschool freedoms and parental rights. And the way they do that is by mitigating things before they become a problem. So if you have a question and your members, for one of your members, you call them up and they are there with the resources to give you the answers of how to respond, how to run things in your school. If you have legal issues and things that might impact homeschooling, because they want to be preemptive and prevent problems in the future from, if they can hit it off now, they'll prevent a future problem from occurring. All right, and so they provide immediate access to full-time specialized attorneys, their own attorneys, 24/7. So and that's for every member. And so if it's after hours, you've got a number to call. You can connect with somebody and they will take care of business. All right, and then next point is during their existence, they've had a solid working relationship with California's diverse statewide private homeschool community. CHIA is one of those. The president of HSLDA, Mike Smith, started out here in California and was involved with CHIA. And so we have an excellent working relationship back and forth, we being the state representatives and them being the legal. And it's just been an incredible and awesome relationship that's helped us to maintain the wonderful law that we have. In California, we have one of the best homeschooling laws in the nation. And I attribute that to this relationship between CHIA, HSLDA, and now I want to talk about FPM, or Family Protection Ministries. Family Protection Ministries was organized in 1986, and they exist to defend the freedom of parents to train, educate, and care for their children privately and without government intervention. Now, FPM, or Family Protection Ministry, is the only full-time organization working in our state capital. They do a phenomenal job. Nathan Pierce is the main guy there, and he's a homeschool graduate, but he's a father. I believe he's got 7 children, and he always tells us his interest in this organization, running this organization and fighting the good fight, is for his children. He looks at them and he feels the reason he's doing this is because he wants to maintain freedom for them. And so they're, again, the only full-time organization in our state capital. They monitor all legislative and administrative actions. He develops relationships with staff, political staffers and legislators, and just advocates on behalf of private home educators and parents. So what they do is they detect, analyze, monitor, and intervene. And what's amazing about their task, and Nathan didn't start this, but he's working with the founders of this organization. Since 1986, they've had 100% of success rate in all of their interventions. It's just amazing. And I only attribute that to the power of God working through that ministry. They work closely with HSLDA and legal research for California legislation. They rely heavily on the expertise of HSLDA attorneys. They are a faith-based Christian organization that look out for private homeschoolers. And they're somebody that we need to support because that's where their support comes from. They're in essence a private Christian lobbyist for homeschoolers and families, but they don't have any big money backing them. So it's just people like you and I that help them do the work that they do. Finally, in concluding, I just want to encourage you to ask for the resource sheet, find out more about the homeschooling options that are out there. Rebecca's going to talk a little bit more in a minute on how to do that, how to get started. But I want to encourage you, prayerfully consider if God would have you personally be involved in homeschooling, personally, all right? And then prayerfully consider what God would have you do to incorporate the homeschool ministry in your church. It's a valid ministry, it supports the family, and we know that family is the foundation of who we are and what God has instituted. It's God that created the family. And so we need to support them. So God bless you. Thank you for your time. And I pray for you to, let me get out of this real quick here. I pray for you to just hear God's voice clearly in this matter and be able to follow his leading. Thank you very much. Rebecca?
Oh. I thank you, Jeff. Thanks so much. I appreciate your time. And I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your experience too, leading a homeschool group and pastoring a church.
Yeah.
Just from someone, hearing from someone who's done it and how doable it is makes all the difference in the world. So
Amen. God will make a way.
yes, he does. Thanks so much, Jeff. God
All
bless
right.
your day.
All right. All right.
And well, don't go too far because you're going to be coming back to be a part of our panel after I give you just a little bit of information on first steps. So Jeff talked to you about the law and some of the definitions of different types of homeschool groups. And I'm going to go into some of the first steps that you might need to consider before you start a homeschool group in your church. So I want to let you know in a few more minutes, our pastors panel will be coming back on. So please be thinking about some questions that you would have for our panelists. We'll have three individuals joining us. And we want to give them an opportunity to answer any questions or concerns that you might have. So be sure to type those into the Q&A. I'd say do the Q&A rather than the chat. It's easier to keep track of questions over in the Q&A. So if you can do that, I would greatly appreciate it. And we'll give you some time to think about that as I'm talking. So the first thing is, what do you need to do if you feel like God is saying, yes, this is something that we need to provide for our church body. But how do you know exactly what to do, where to go? Where do I even start with all of this? Jeff talked a little bit about the law and some of the different types of groups, but I would encourage you to assess the needs of the families in your body. Are you seeing that you have a group of veteran homeschool families in your church that the Lord is maybe rising up to get involved? Do you have a whole bunch of newbies that are COVID homeschoolers and saying they're not going to send their kids back? And that's the type of families that you'll be working with, or do you have a group of both? The experience of these families has a lot to do with the direction you may go. Some of them may provide more structure. They may feel that you need to provide them with some structure and perhaps some fellowship in order to homeschool within their church, but there may be others that feel like they need you to give them more guidance and accountability. Do they feel like they need the church to oversee their homeschool, or do they feel like the church just needs to provide some type of a structure within for them to operate under? Another thing to consider is the vision of your leadership. Just because we look at what our families have going on and what their needs are and what their experience is, but you also need to look at the vision of your leadership. Are you just wanting to provide a safe place for families to homeschool? If so, then you maybe aren't looking at a PSP. Are you looking to further the church ministry of discipleship to your body? Are you looking to make outreach to the community around you? Something else would be, are you looking to be a vehicle of more than discipleship, but a vehicle of evangelism? Are you going to want to open up your homeschool group to just your church or Christian families in your community in addition to your church? Or do you want to have a come one, come all, and we want to help you attitude, in which case you may find yourself ministering to families that are not believers. They may perhaps be same-sex couples. There's all kinds of different scenarios that we can run into when we step outside of the family of Christ. Those are things to consider. What is your leadership vision? What do you feel like you can do versus what the needs are? So, and as Jeff said, and this will come out more in our question and answer later on, but is support group versus private school satellite program? How do we know which way to go? And it seems like providing a support group, which is a loosely structured fellowship group that provides some structure, perhaps some training and equipping for the parents, but mostly social and educational opportunities for the families. is easier to start than it is a private school satellite program. Private school satellite program provides more accountability for your families. As Jeff talked about the record keeping requirements, you need to consider, do you have someone who can oversee something like that? Do you have someone with enough experience to know how, who has the time and the ability to do that? Another thing I would consider is to, if you're pastor in the pulpit and you don't homeschool, put a homeschool parent in charge of this homeschool group. Over the years, I've seen a number of churches have day schools and a day school teacher in charge of a homeschool group, or someone who really doesn't know about homeschooling and the ins and outs and the nature of private Christian homeschooling in charge. And there's a lot of misunderstandings and unrealistic expectations taking place there. So if you put a homeschool parent in charge of the homeschool group who works under the leadership of the church, there's a much better chance of having success with your homeschool program. And consider your resources. Do you have space constraints? Churches, most churches I know are packed to the gills in their offices and Sunday school rooms. But just consider, do you have space to store records? Do you have space for, say, a PSP administrator to work? Could they work from home? Think about your space that you have to work with in welcoming a homeschool group onto your grounds during the week. If you have a day school, or is every available space occupied during the week? Another thing to consider is personnel. The personnel that will be running your field trips or overseeing your membership, taking charge of social or holiday gatherings. How many people do you have at your disposal who are willing to volunteer their time to organize these activities? Another thing to consider is, and this is specifically with the PSP, more so than with the support group, is the greater accountability that you require or that you are holding your families to. You provide, the greater accountability that you provide requires more work on your end to follow through. So for instance, you established a PSP. And you've decided that you want your parents to turn in they need to turn in course of study, the beginning of the year, but you want them to turn in attendance records on a quarterly basis. You want them to turn in report cards on a quarterly basis. And you have, say, 25 families with each of them have 3 students. So let's say that 75 students' records that you're following up with on a quarterly basis. Do you have the ability to hold them accountable or to follow through? If you don't have the ability to follow through, then I suggest you don't make those types of accountability measures, or perhaps you need to limit the size of your group. And as Jeff's talked about, he said it's very doable to have both. Perhaps you have families in your school that don't want to be in a PSP. They don't feel like they need record keeping accountability. They're happy to file their own private school affidavit, but they want to have fellowship with their church group, which makes sense. So perhaps you want to provide support group activities for all homeschoolers in your church, and PSP services just for those who feel like they need that accountability. And then there's also the consideration that you may have some public school at home families within your church who would not be able to enroll in your private school satellite program because they're public school students. You can't be enrolled in 2 schools at one time, but perhaps they want to have fellowship and be a part of the activities that their church group is providing. And there's something of ideological differences there. And I know Jeff Paisano is probably going to talk about that a little bit because they have that situation in their school, in their church too. So these are things for you to consider: the nature of your homeschoolers in your body, what their needs are, and also what your ability is to provide. And Pastor Jeff referred to a co-op, and Brad Dacus referred to co-ops, and that's really like a day at your church where you have classes, and that can be worked concurrently with a support group, with a PSP, or even if you have a support group and a PSP, you can have your class day as well. And this provides our current environment provides for some interesting situations. We do have families where both parents work and they they need help with their children. And it takes some creativity on their part with their schedule, and it also takes some support from the rest of us in the homeschool community and their church to help make that work for those families. And then there's the single moms that have that additional layer of help that is needed when they're the primary breadwinner and they're the only parent that's active in the home for their families. So these are things to consider as you decide what type of homeschool group you want to start with your home, with your church. Chia is here to help you out. We can, you know, as Jeff Byers has said, and I have done, we've both established homeschool groups. We know the work that it takes in order to be able to do that, and we're happy to help you along the way. Another thing, and Jeff went into the law pretty carefully about what requirements are. And so the only thing I'm going to add to that is that your leadership does need to know the law. And I would just point out that there is no specific homeschool law in California. Private homeschoolers fall under private school statutes. And charter school students fall under public school statutes. So when students are enrolled in your PSP, they're exempt from public school attendance. So just so you know, let us know if you have any questions about that. Type that into the Q&A. And another, we talked about our partner organizations, and in addition to we've worked very closely with Homeschool Legal Defense Association. They provide legal representation to families who run into trouble homeschooling. And so it's essential that every private homeschool family becomes a member of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And yes, again, our legislative watchdogs in Sacramento. And we're very grateful for PJI and the work that they're doing, ringing out this clarion call to pastors to encourage you to support your homeschoolers and encourage your families to bring your kids home from school and home from government school and home. Here's just a quick tips for new homeschoolers. This is a step-by-step guide, and I realize this is if you want to snap a picture of this real quick, when you walk out of this meeting and you say yes, we're going to start a homeschool group, and Mrs. Smith says, okay, how do I start? Here's a quick snapshot of how to get started, but we'll go ahead and include this in the meeting notes that we send out to you afterwards. So with that, this is kind of a step-by-step how to get started, how to start a homeschool group within your church. And we're running just a little bit ahead of time, which is great. That means we have more time for our panels. We have more time for your questions and answers. So I'm really excited for you to meet each of them. I am going to go ahead and quit sharing my screen now and come on back in. And I want to, Anjali, thank you, Anjali. If you can invite our panelists to start joining us, we can populate our screen or populate our screen view with them. I'm looking to see if we have questions and answers. And honestly, I don't see the Q&A panel, Anjali. I see the chat, but not Q&A. So I'm not sure.
This meeting does not have it for some reason. So you'll just have to use chat.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and use chat.
There's a couple of questions already in the chat, just a couple up from the bottom.
Oh, great. Okay, wonderful. So I want to, I'm going to do a little adjusting here on my end. I'm setting this up as speaker or as a gallery view. That way I can see all of you gentlemen at the same time. If our guests would like to do that too, I think that's a good way to interact with everybody. So again, I want to just say thanks for joining us, Pastor Jeff Byers, founder of God's Word Church, and you've all met Jeff already as he gave us his presentation. Jeff Pisano is on staff at Transformation Calvary in Rancho Cucamonga, and he is the director of Rancho Christian Academy. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Hello.
And Pastor Aaron Rue from Revival Christian Academy. He's the overseeing pastor of Revival Christian Fellowship in Menifee and the overseeing pastor of Revival Christian Academy. Thanks for joining us, Pastor Aaron. Oh, I think you're still, yes, your microphone is still muted. Anjali, can you help out there?
I think I'm there.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for joining us. I
Yep.
appreciate it. So first of all, would like each of you to introduce your homeschooling experience and how long you've had a group at your church. And I think, Jeff, if you want to do a quick overview, because I know you talked about that a little more at length just a few minutes ago. Jeff Byers.
Okay. I'm sorry. Well, you'd asked about our experience in running our group, you said?
Yes.
Okay. Well, again, we started back in the 80s with a support group, and then my wife gravitated to the leadership of that group as we went along with that. We incorporated a PSP. So we started with the support group, went to the PSP, and then, as I said, in 2006, we gave that to another family, and it's still thriving well. Then we started our sports group in about 2009 and added other co-op classes. We were working with all of the other PSPs in the area and all private individual homeschoolers as well. And then we just felt like the Lord's calling to start our PSP, our new PSP last fall, and we call that PSP Christian School.
Okay, so many years of experience leading a group.
Oh gosh, probably about 30.
Okay, I was gonna say, if we need a calculator, it's been a long time.
I don't know, when did it all start? I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably about 30.
About 30 years. That's impressive. That's impressive. Pastor Aaron, how about you? What is your experience, with homeschooling and leading a homeschool and having a homeschool group at your church?
Revival Christian Academy started in the late 90s, and I began to oversee it as the pastor about 10 years ago. And so we've navigated through over the last 10 years really a monumental change in education, where we've seen a rise in charter schools, and we've seen a change in even the types of families who are wanting to homeschool. And it's been interesting to see really over the last few months as everything shut down, how it really, in our context, in our own church, it's ignited families to want to begin to homeschool because they were in Christian school, they were in private school, they were in public school, and ultimately they all homeschooled the last few months. And so it's been an encouragement for us. The last few months we've held interest meetings and we've seen really good response.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, and I've heard wonderful things from Michelle Becerra, your principal, as well. Yeah, the exciting things that are happening. And Jeff Pisano, can you share about your homeschooling experience and how long your church has had a homeschool group?
Sure. My wife and I started homeschooling in the late 90s with our kids when they were still in preschool. Mm-hmm. And at the time, our church did have a support group. I took that over after the lady that was overseeing that stepped away. Her husband became the director of the children's ministry, and so they were occupied with that. And over the course of a couple of years, I realized that our call was beyond just a support group. We were kind of divided in our efforts, being in two different places at once. And we formed a PSP in 2002, and I've been overseeing that since then.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And I guess my first question for you, I know we have some nuts and bolts questions in our chat, but I would like to know what impact having a homeschool group has had on your church. And I'd like each of you to answer that, because I think you'll all have I'm guessing you'll have different answers, but Pastor Aaron, would you speak to that first?
Our homeschool group, it's in the last 10 years, we've changed a little bit of our philosophy. We were doing a PSP, which we still are doing, and then we were hosting co-op classes. And so on Mondays and Wednesdays from 8 to 4 o'clock, we were hosting a variety of classes, about 30 classes per semester, where we were bringing in outside tutors to come in and teach kids at different grade levels and different subjects. And that had a real impact on our church because it required a lot of additional staff, facilities staff, tutors to come on. It was a benefit to the homeschool community, but it almost at times became a burden to the church because it was facility intensive. We went through a season about 5 years ago where we really sat down and started to reevaluate how we were doing and why we were doing certain things. And we actually found that in us offering those classes on Mondays and Wednesdays, we had essentially become a very inexpensive private homeschool option for parents. It wasn't really homeschooling. We were finding that parents were enrolling their students, junior high and high school, in 5, 6 classes on Mondays and Wednesdays, and they were not doing a majority of the teaching. They were leaving that to the tutors. And after we prayed about it and talked about it, we really thought, man, we've gotten away from the call for parents to home educate their students. We've just become an inexpensive Christian private school. And so we changed midstream, and it was a hard course to change. But now we offer our PSP, which has always been our core, and we offer a co-op that we call Academy Days that meets on 2 Wednesdays a month, and it's run by the moms, the dads that are involved in our school.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been a real blessing because it stays with the core principle of moms and dads educating their own kids. And so the co-op, how it differs is we're not bringing in outside tutors to teach math or science or things of that nature. The parents are actually stepping up and leading those groups. They teach a language arts program, they'll do art, they'll do music, and they do all of the teaching and all of the assisting. And so it's a neat way for the homeschool community to gather for socialization and education, as well as it's a great opportunity for parents to step up and help assist in schooling their kids.
Now, Pastor Aaron, do you have families in your PSP that are not members of your church?
Yes, we have quite a few families in our PSP that they're not a member of our church. They're members of other churches in the area. I would say we probably have about 60-70% of the people in our homeschool PSP are a part of our church. And we're seeing actually over the last couple of months, we've seen additional families that are interested in homeschooling that aren't a part of our church, but want to be a part of the PSP. And it's actually been used as an opportunity for us to share, hey, if you love the values that we hold as a school, you'll probably even love the values of our church even more because the two go hand in hand. Our philosophy of ministry for homeschool directly comes from our philosophy of ministry in the church.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a statement of faith that you require families to agree to, or do you enroll families that are not faith of the family of faith?
We do not. We've gone through seasons. Years ago, we did allow people to be a part of our PSP that were not in agreement with us doctrinally, and it caused issues. It became a real people problem because when you're trying to minister and you're trying to use the Bible as the basis for your education, if you don't agree on the scriptures, or in some cases you have non-believers that are part of your program, they're never going to understand where you're coming from, and you're never going to be able to educate from a biblical worldview because they don't have that worldview. Mm-hmm. And so we have really over the last 5 years tried to make sure that when we're doing our family interviews, we try to get to know the parents and try to judge and ask questions as to what they believe and why they believe it, because we don't want to accept everybody in and then have it be an issue for the leadership of the school or an issue for the family. When you get in the middle of a school year, it becomes hard if issues arise because you're not working from the same playbook or
Right.
belief system to help really steward those families in the direction they should be going.
Okay, thank you. That's a good point. You're not working towards the same end goals, are you?
Nope.
Yeah. Jeff Pisano, would you share how your homeschool group has impacted your church?
Okay. It really has changed over the years. I mean, we're looking at 20 years and the whole face of the church has changed in the last 20 years. Realistically, at the beginning, there was not a whole lot of interaction. It certainly didn't impact the church in terms of finances or things like that. The school has always been self-sufficient in that regard. But as the years have progressed, we found ourselves reaching out to the church more, hosting things for the fellowship, outreaches to the community, ways for our homeschool group, our students, and the parents to give back a little. We've been blessed with being able to use the facility. Our pastor homeschooled for several years and is seriously behind homeschooling. But at the same time, we were kind of a hidden group for a while, and we realized, you know what, we're here, we're a ministry of the church, we're part of this, and so how are we impacting the church itself? And so we hosted mother-daughter teas and Nerf combat wars and different things throughout the years, just as an opportunity to minister to the families. And we're looking this year at possible parenting classes and things like that, as well. As has been mentioned, we have a lot of families that have been just tossed into homeschooling, and some of them are interested, but yet at the same time don't know where to begin.
Right. All kinds. But I love how your homeschool group families are serving the church. They're not just there, but they're doing things to actively minister to the rest of the body, which is wonderful. Jeff Byers, what's your take on this? Where do you see the impact on your church?
Well, when we started our church plant, again, as I said before, it was in an area that was very low income and indigent, a lot of HUD housing. Even our church membership was very transient. A year later, people would be gone and moved on. And so primarily while we had some interaction in the church, primarily most of our people coming in were coming in from other churches, and we did accept anybody. One of our tenets, one of our requirements was that people attended church on a regular basis. And we did and do still have a statement of faith that people need to agree to. And really that's I don't want to say our leverage, but that's our way of trying to keep everybody in concert and in focus and unity. And Pastor Aaron made a great point that can bring disunity into the group if we're not in a common area. And I like that. I also like the fact that he talked about having family interviews to make sure that people are online with that. And we do the same. It's very important to make sure when you bring people into your group that they are in concert with you. Our church primarily is the covering for our PSP, and through that we provide such administrative things as insurance and so forth. And but actually we don't have a church building. We originally rented from a Presbyterian church that had facilities, and now we kind of barter with them. We help some in their ministry stuff and their maintenance around the church, and come and help out on maintenance days and so forth. And they realize that we're a ministry, so they really help us out with the cost of having and using their facilities. So.
Oh, that's nice. That sounds like a nice arrangement. Okay, so now what I want to do is cover a couple of the questions here in our chat. let's see, Jerry asks, he says he definitely wants to start something in his church. He's leaning toward the PSP. He says, we have a small ministry, so parents I want to work with are from the community, not the local ministry. Is this advisable? So I'm thinking, Jerry, you're talking about that being the parents, the families that you want to minister to, as opposed to the parents that would be part of your leadership team. That's the way I'm taking that question. Who has a ready answer for Jerry? Is this advisable to take families from the community?
I think my suggestion would be to really take time to think and pray about, are you doing it as an outreach, or are you doing it as an inreach with the goal of helping people, families, to raise their kids in the ways of the Lord? Because if you're inviting or starting a group that's primarily made of non-believing families, you can't really require them to educate their kids in the ways of the Lord, because the mom and the dad, they're not following in the ways of the Lord. And so if you're viewing this as an outreach to families in your community, just go into it understanding that's your goal. But if you're really committed to, as a church, having a ministry that helps to empower and equip families to raise their kids in the ways of the Lord through private Christian home education, then I would suggest you make sure that the families that make up your group are primarily believers.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have something you would like to add to Pastor Aaron's response?
Well, I would agree with what Pastor Aaron said. It is important anytime you have an organization that you want it to operate in unity, and you got to look at what the goal is. We have no problems bringing outsiders into our group, but made it very clear that we were a Christian organization designed to disciple our children, and that's really our ultimate goal. Academics are important, to be sure, but the spirituality of our children, where they end up in their adult life, that's eternal. And so you have to figure out where it is that you want to go, what your direction is, how much of it would be an outreach to converting people to faith in Christ. I don't know. I've never really seen that happen. I've never approached it from that perspective.
Okay.
But if you're talking about bringing other Christian families in, yeah, certainly. And that's where the interviewing process comes in. Find out where they're coming from. And it's important to have a statement of faith and have them have the knowledge of what your organization represents.
Okay, great. Thank you. And he also asks, he did say, yes, the intent is for believers to have the option for Christian homeschooling. What are the what's the expected financial cost to start a PSP? Jeff Pisano, you look like I see the calculator going in your head.
To be perfectly honest, it really is going to depend upon what kind of support you have. In our case, it cost us nothing. We had the benefit. We are a ministry of Transformation Calvary, so the facilities have always been available to us, obviously barring already being occupied for other events. But it doesn't really cost anything. There's no financial fees in filing a PSA. So long as you're using the church's insurance and the church is covering that, there aren't costs for those things. So it really does come down to administrative costs, keeping track of things. Yeah, we had to buy a fireproof filing cabinet in order to keep records legally and stuff, but it really was minimal costs, and those were able to be absorbed by the first year's tuition and things that we did in charging. Just as a thought to the previous question, if you are reaching out to a community and they're not attached to your own church for the most part, you do need to keep in mind how you're going to keep in contact with people. It does present a few logistical issues that you need to address and make sure, so you don't have people slipping through the cracks.
So what you're saying is you're not going to see them at church on Sunday. You're not going to see them during midweek study or youth group. So you need to establish some way of having contact with them.
Well, yeah, if you never see them, how can you minister to them? So you just have to take that into account in your planning and how you set up and what events you do and activities and things like that from our perspective, because we do have families that don't attend here, and how we reach out to them, there's a little bit more involvement. We have people that pair up with them a little just to make sure that they're doing okay if we don't see them on a regular basis.
Oh, so you have like a mentoring
In essence, yeah.
program. Mm-hmm. So you have couples, families ministering to different families. That's a great idea. We did that with our PSP. We had our veteran homeschool moms. We always teamed them up with our first year and sometimes first and second year homeschool moms, so that they had a friend. They had a kind of a big sister there in the school already, and they were the ones that would call them or email them or text and remind them that, hey, your records are due coming up in 3 weeks. Can I help you with the grades for your kids? Or, hey, we're having, that mandatory meeting is coming up, want to carpool, and develop that kind of relationship. And that has helped, and that helped us an awful lot and it helped the new parents, but it also helped us isolate if there was a family that was really having trouble, that we knew, okay, they need some extra TLC, or we knew someone was having parenting issues. It was just a way. We were a PSP, so we did have that little bit of accountability there. But yeah, the mentor moms and dads was really definitely great. Let's see. I think we have another question here. We have a question. Gary, you wanted to talk about the COVID rules that are affecting our classes at church. We do have a meeting specifically set up for that. It's not, we weren't really going to be talking to that right now, especially since we see that the health orders are changing dramatically from one county to the next. So we do have, and I'll make sure that this goes out in the meeting notes to you, Gary, we have a leaders meeting coming up on June 24th, the last Wednesday of the month. So we'll be talking about how to lead a homeschool group in the post-pandemic world. So, and all of you are welcome to join us.
That's a webinar, just to make it clear.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we'll be. So, and we'll be having John McGowan, one of our other board members who is an attorney, will be coming in and sitting with us and helping us wade through it. We have another question. Can you go over the immunizations for those families who choose not to vaccinate? And I don't know if any of you as pastors are in charge of keeping records, or I know you may not be the hands-on workhorse behind the scenes with all of that. Do any of you feel like you can speak to that?
Well, I'll just say, it seems as though this topic changes from not year to year, but it changes over time of what the requirements are. But basically, the exemption, there was a big thing about the exemption in our legislature where they basically, for public schools, they said there is no exemption. And so at that point, but they did leave that for the private homeschoolers to be able to utilize. So if you choose personal belief exemptions, then you fill out that card, and that basically takes the place of any immunizations that might be required by the state. So that's just a real brief overview or cursory, my cursory knowledge of it. Here again, that's where organizations like HSLDA could come in to bring some clarity or some advisement on that legal aspect of it. And I don't know if Chia has any resources for that or not.
Yeah, it's all on our website. And just a brief little overview, the card that Jeff is talking about is the CDPH 286. You do need to maintain that card for each of your students. You do not, although your students do not need to have immunizations, they're exempt because they have home-based studies. So on the back of that card, there's an option where you're not filling out the dates for those immunizations. You can check the little box that says home study. And that's really what basically exempts your student from having those having the vaccinations. And those forms are kept on file at the school. So the registrar or the custodian of records will keep those. Nobody sees them. The California Department of Education may require an audit of those records from one year to a next. It's just arbitrary, but they don't see any of your students' personal identifiable information. They just want to know, they may say how many do you have immunized and how many you don't. When you say that all your students are home-based, there's not really anything for them to audit anymore anyway. But your students are exempt from vaccinations because they're home-based study. And it's just a matter of checking the right box on that blue form. So I hope that answers your question. Now, Jelly, I hope I'm saying your name right. Jelly says, we don't have our own building. How would you recommend we go about doing a PSP? Could this be done with keeping all records, etc., in the director's home? So this sounds like it's maybe similar to your situation, Jeff, where you're sharing a facility with another church at times, or?
Yes. When we were doing the PSP out of our church, of course, we would keep our records there, but they don't have to be kept at a church building. They just, when you file your affidavit, you file your location of records, I believe, and that's where you would keep your records. Now, you do need to keep them safe because, when students graduate and go on, they need transcripts or whatever, you will still need to provide those records. And so those are things, Jeff Pisano talked about having a fireproof safe. I know we went to a police auction and got, it was actually a drug safe, but it was a concrete line fireproof safe. And that's what we use to keep our records in. So, yeah, you can keep them at the director's house, and that is not a promise, wherever your records are at. You can buy small, fireproof safes, through Walmart and online stores and so forth. You don't have to have anything big and fancy.
And we always recommend that the homeschool parents keep copies of all of their children's records themselves.
Yes,
so in the event of a natural disaster and the records at the school are destroyed, whether it's fire, earthquake, who knows? We've never had that happen to us, but it's important for the parents to be able to have those records as well. Okay, I think that's it. I was just going to remind all of you, if you have questions, go ahead and type them into the chat. And with that, I want to give each of you an opportunity to just share. We've got a few minutes. We've got enough time left. I'd like you to maybe consider sharing for just a couple of minutes about what you think your fellow pastors or church leaders need to know about having a homeschool group in your church, whether it be philosophically or practical, hands-on. We've talked about a number of times insurance has been mentioned. She always recommends every homeschool group, not just PSPs, but support groups to have insurance. What about legal liability to your church? Do you choose members from your church only? We talked about that a little bit, versus outreach to the community. But if there was one thing that you could say, what would you say to your fellow pastors and church leaders?
I would have to say, don't miss the opportunity you have to not only invest in kids, but invest in families. Revival Christian Academy has given us a vehicle by which we're able to not only invest in kids, but really help to disciple families. And we've seen many families grow not only as home educators, but grow in their Christian walks. We've seen many families who were disconnected and isolated become connected and part of a community. It's been neat to see over the years how these families in our group really bond together and support one another beyond just home education. And so if you're a pastor, if you're a ministry leader at a church and you're considering it, I would highly encourage you to pray about it because it is a great opportunity to really extend your ministry beyond Sunday morning, beyond Wednesday night, beyond children's ministry, beyond youth ministry, and really invest in the building block of our society, which is the family. We see today all over the news the disintegration of the family. And if we look at scripture, you can see that God in his divine wisdom and design orchestrated society to be built on intact families. And I would have to say that we are seeing much of the news that's been created today because we're seeing the families ripped apart. And homeschooling gives you an opportunity to help unify and put families together. Now, it's not easy, and you need to count the cost. There may be financial costs, although our ministry has been blessed to be self-supportive, and so it's not been a burden to the church, but it really has been a blessing. And then there's a people cost because ministry is hard work, and you're ministering to families in a way that you have never ministered to them before. And it's not always easy. We have found over the last few years that we're building in more accountability into our homeschooling, and it really is not because we want to have a bunch of rules and law and order, but it's really opportunities for us to disciple them. And so we do a monthly meeting that we require all of our PSV families to come to. We invite guests to come in, such as Rebecca, to invest in those families, to educate them so they can be built up and empowered. And then we're meeting regularly with our families for what we call academic reviews to help sit with them and see how their schooling is going, so that when you start in August and everything's sunshine and flowers outside, and then you end up in June, families aren't surprised that they actually had to school throughout the year, but you've had checkpoints in which you can come alongside and say, how is it going? How is this curriculum that you're using going? What can we do to help support you? And I think that Jeff really has touched on that we need to make sure that we're connecting with these families. And as you connect with them, it's an investment that I really think will reap huge dividends in the child's life and in the family's life, and then in the life of your church.
Mm-hmm. Oh, excellent. Thank you. Thanks for those words of encouragement. Jeff Pisano, do you have thoughts on this? What's like the golden word of wisdom here?
To be honest, looking at the situation that we're currently in, and March was a game changer for everybody, obviously. Mm-hmm. But we've seen since we opened up information and we posted an online streaming thing for homeschool information for people, and just the realization in that as a church, we really can't ignore the fact that we have families that their call is to disciple their own children. We can't delegate that to somebody else. We can't delegate it to schools. We can't delegate it even to a private Christian school, because at the end of the day, as parents, as a dad especially, the command in Ephesians is, and you fathers, we're going to stand before God as to how well we did that. And so as a church, we can't leave families that are struggling in that area without some kind of support, without some kind of help. And so personally, homeschooling fits the model of discipleship best. It gives you the best opportunity to interact with your kids, while those things are happening. So as a church to say, we don't have there's a group of people here, and more now than ever before are asking. We've had more response and interest in homeschooling in the last 2 months than we've had in an entire year, most years, for new families. So that shows that there's a need. And if there's a need, then we need to step in and be there to minister to those needs, because otherwise the truth of the matter is people will go somewhere else. And so where are they going? If they go to other locations, are they getting the support that they would get from a body of believers? Because there are groups out there that aren't Bible-based. And so they would end up lacking in those areas. Whereas we have a mandate as a church to come alongside the body of Christ. So personally, I believe that we really should see this at most churches. So as a pastor, are you considering this? Even if you've got a small group, it doesn't have to be a PSB, but are you meeting on a monthly basis as a support group? And some of our meetings are roundtable discussions where, for example, we'll talk about adapting curriculum from one child to the next. It's been mentioned, most homeschool families don't have a ton of money. Usually you're working on single incomes. We have actually had single parents homeschool successfully with our group. But in that, you can't afford to necessarily buy 3 different sets of curriculum because you've got 3 kids with different learning styles. So gleaning from other parents, how do you do this, has been very helpful. We've been having families that have been absolutely blessed with the realization, hey, there's options out there, or ways to save money on curriculum, or you name the topic. And so realizing that we're concerned about them individually as a family, as well as just, do you have your paperwork in on time? Mm-hmm. Yes, there is that aspect. When we're a school, we've got to have that there, because if we don't, other families could be adversely affected. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, these are individual families with individual needs, and who better to reach them and minister to them than their own fellowship?
Mm-hmm. I think there's so much comfort and security to be derived from knowing that you're homeschooling under the umbrella of your church. And not that your pastor has to be a homeschool expert, but that, you know, there's somebody within your fellowship that takes on that role, but knowing that they're accountable to their church leadership, and church leadership is looking out for their best interest. There's no reason to do it alone. They don't have to be lone rangers. And what a comfort, and what a rich way to have a fellowship within your church too. Jeff Byers, what would your one word of wisdom be?
I don't know if I could contain it to one word. I've already said a lot, and I think what Pastor Aaron and Jeff Pisano have said is right on, spot on. Opportunities for the church to mentor families. One of the things that I didn't mention in my presentation was, I think the stats are, according to Dr. Brian Ray, about 2.5 million families are homeschooling now, or maybe it's 2.5 million students are being homeschooled now. Yeah. And the article that Michael Donnelly wrote, he said there are projections it could increase exponentially because of everything that's going on, possibly up to 10 million. What an opportunity. And a lot of those families may turn to the public school system for their school at home. But the problem with that is, you know, when God is left out of the equation, you're still going to have issues. Discipleship is what we're talking about. Discipleship is so important, not only ministry of parents to children, but the church to the parents and the families. The family is the building block. You're right on, Aaron, what you said. And you know, we need to get on board with this opportunity and, you know, be involved, encourage these families, help them out, show them the way, and show them how that they can raise their children in a Christ-centered education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't have to send their children to, what was it you said? You quoted Bodhi Bakum, you don't have to send your children to Caesar.
When we send our children to Caesar for their education, then we wonder why they come home as Romans.
Yeah, right. Very good point. Now we do have another question was for parents that are both working. And here's a does present a challenge. Could you elaborate a little on how that might work with the church helping and having other church members helping? How can we support families where both parents have to work?
Well, I'm sure there's some ideas and some examples of what's been done in the past. I think the first thing is to just really pray and ask God how it's to be done, because God's plan will always be the best. And so that's really important for these parents to understand that if they feel called and that God wants them to educate their children, how is it that they can do it? Can things be changed around? Can they survive on a lesser income? Can they do a work at home job? A lot of that's been transpiring now in the last few months, with a lot of people transitioning to working at home. Maybe that will become more of a permanent thing, and that can help parents in their education endeavors. Help and support from the church. That's already been spoken of, many times. So just right off the top of my head, those are my thoughts. But again, pray and seek God. Find his plan. He will always, always, always make a way. Amen?
Amen. And I think too, and just for you to know, Jelly, Chia does have a Working Homeschool Moms Facebook group. Dads are welcome to join too, but there's a lot of encouragement and resources shared back and forth there. But the first thing I would say to the parents is to erase all of the lines that they're and preconceived notions that you have about what school looks like and home and work. And as Jeff said, perhaps you can do more work from home, but also school does not have to take place Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. School can take place any day of the week and any hour of the day, provided there's, the teachers and students are awake. But school does not have to take place at the time you think it does, and it also doesn't have to look like school within a classroom. You'll be utilizing some more creative methods for instruction for your children. And so that's just one place to begin there. And then also working within a co-op situation. Also, we've had in our homeschool group where we had a grandpa who was raising his daughter, and so the neighbor oversaw the child's actual lessons, but grandpa was in charge of the students' learning. So, but the neighbor did help out watching the little girl and making sure that she was getting her lessons done, and then grandpa was in charge later. So, as we said, God made a way for that particular family, and it's very seldom that we've seen a grandpa take over the education of a grandchild, but it worked. It was great. The child graduated, and it was a very successful experience. So.
I think too, Rebecca, if I might add, what you're saying about looking at schooling in a different way, that is so important with homeschooling at large. Right. Every child is different. Every parent is different. They teach, and the parents teach differently. The children learn differently. And so in applying that to, what do I do when we both have to work? Look at things differently, but also with the whole homeschooling idea and concept, we have to just really be God-led. Just seek him and pray and ask him, and he will give the answers.
Right, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit more about something that's come up a few times. You talked about the ministry, the homeschool ministry being self-supportive. And we didn't, I think, Jeff, you didn't touch on it, and I didn't in my presentation. Is there are some, do you charge your families a membership fee or an enrollment or tuition? And that, it sounds like, is covering the administrative expenses. Can we talk about that a little bit? Or perhaps you don't charge a tuition or any kind of administrative fee.
I'll go ahead and start with that, and maybe the others can chime in. But the way we operate is we are a faith-based ministry. Because we operate under the church, we can take donations for our PSB Sports, PSB Christian School. And so the reason we do that, and the reason we offer that, is we do charge. We charge for our co-ops. We try to charge a family fee and make it as inexpensive as possible. We charge to do our sports because typically we have to rent fields from the city where we live and facilities. And so, but what we always say in our response is that if you can't pay, you can play, or you can participate for whatever you can pay or for free. So in that, we really are operating faith-based. We're asking God to provide for the finances. And over the years, it's been a blessing. He's provided us with some donors that bring finances in, that pay for things. So again, if we don't have the money for something, then we just don't do it. We can't do it. You know, we have to be prudent in that sense. But if God's called us to do it and provided the teaching or the leadership or whatever, the people to facilitate it, then we'll go ahead with it. So we try to be led by the Lord in that area, and He's our provider.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you.
If I can add to that, we do actually have a registration fee. We have a tuition that we do either monthly or annually, depending on how families want to do it. But if you're looking at fees, we've got a cap on that even per family. So it doesn't matter how many students you have, at a certain point you max out. And $25 a month for a family of 5 kids homeschooling is hardly going to break the budget most of the time. It's certainly not about the money, but you know, co-ops have intrinsic costs. There's office expenses and handbooks, and where does that come from? But at the same time, if there's a family that's struggling, or the scholarships are always available for those things. And this year, with everything being shut down and us not being able to do most of our events, we ended up waiving tuition for the last 3 months of the year anyway. But realizing in that yes, there's a cost. My salary isn't, since I am on staff at the church, it's not based on the homeschool group. If it was, I think I might have the entire school year's budget would take care of 1 month's pay. So we're not in it for the money. Right. But people do realize, hey, if you want to have a co-op class, there's expenses that go to those things. And families need to realize that as part of that we do, that, you know what, we're contributing to this. We are the beneficiaries of our own expenses that we do. So these costs that we pay are for our own good. Mm-hmm. And along the way, the purchases that we've made, we try to be reasonable with them. We have science lending libraries. I've got a couple of microscopes that people can check out that through the years, extra funds were available at the end of the year. So we went ahead and invested in those kinds of things for families to be able to turn around and use, and say they've got a student that's doing biology. Now they've got equipment that they don't have to go out and purchase. They can check out for the year or for a couple of months or whatever the situation would be. And they've benefited other families throughout the years. We've had families that have donated things as well. And then in those lean years, well, the Lord provides. So God's not broke. For sure.
Mm-hmm. So do you lend out curriculum as well, Jeff?
We don't.
More supplies. It's
more supplies. We do have families independently, and that's one of the reasons why people need the support that we provide as homeschool groups, not just us, but most PSPs are support groups. We have families that will happily lend, hey, I'm not using first grade this year, I'll need it back next year, but you're more than welcome to borrow it for a year. And so we encourage our families. We actually have a super secret Facebook page, and there's one of the sections on there is for curriculum. People can post what they're looking for or what they have available, and just come alongside each other. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have the space to store curriculum. It can get pretty bulky. But we do have a lot of other resources and supplies that are available that we provide that way or make available.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Rebecca, we do have a lending library. We've over the years have compiled different curriculum and resources. So our parents are welcome to come in and utilize those. Like Jeff Pisano's group, we do charge a tuition, a monthly tuition, but it's based on their participation with us, and we try to wrangle their participation so we can stay connected, like with the co-ops or sports and so forth. But we do provide curriculum for free. I want to make it clear, the curriculum that the parents teach from is provided by each family. We don't buy their curriculum. We can make recommendations for them, and we can help them, guide them if they're looking for a specific type of curriculum or method of teaching, and we can do counseling in that area as well. But again, the curriculum is provided by each family, even with the PSP. So basically what the tuition does is it's a minimal cost, and or to the families, and it provides for the record keeping and the facilitating of all of that.
Okay, great. And how about you, Pastor Aaron? Where do you, is Revival on this spectrum? Do you charge a tuition or a registration fee?
Yeah, we do. We charge a registration fee, and then we also charge a monthly fee from September to June. And really the philosophy behind it is, if it doesn't cost a family anything, why should they have a stick-to-itiveness to it? And the money that they're investing, they're really investing in themselves. And so we've found that by charging a minimal fee, it helps families be more committed to home education, and it helps to provide funds for the administration it takes. We're blessed here at Revival to have two really veteran homeschool moms who have stepped up and lead our homeschool ministry, and the amount of hours and time that they put in to help really cultivate the community as well as disciple the individual families is really, the expense is nowhere near covered by the monthly fees, but we're blessed to be able to have experienced people called to come alongside and really continue to invest in homeschooling. And then we do offer resources. We have a curriculum that's been donated over the years that we'll make available to families who are in need, or we'll do a curriculum exchange. And so we haven't found that charging a monthly tuition is a barrier to entry for people. We each and every day, even if we're a single family income, we will scrounge up change and spend money at Starbucks or somewhere else, and charging $30, $40 a month is not a lot for a large homeschool family, as Pastor Jeff was saying. That's far cheaper than probably enrolling them in other extracurricular activities that we may enroll our kids in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you pointed out the buy-in factor, so to speak, and what, not speaking from a pastor's perspective, but from an administrative perspective, you know, we did charge a fee. We had a fee for our families, a monthly tuition fee, which was very nominal. And if, of course, if people were having difficulty, that we never, nobody was excluded from our program because of a lack of funds. However, sometimes what I would see was when a family kind of drops off, stops paying tuition, there's also a record keeping problem. And there was more to it than just finances if there was silence on their end. And as a PSP, as a private school, we are required by law to maintain students' cumulative records. And if you can't do that without the parents' partnership. So that was a deal breaker for me. It wasn't the finances, but it would be the unwillingness of the teaching parent to provide the documentation for us to maintain their students' records. So yeah, it's that buy-in, and that it is also just another level of kind of accountability, is that they're there. So, well, you know, we are closing up, coming to the end of our time together. I know Jerry asks if there's specific steps to guide through the starting a homeschool group, and we are glad to work with you with those steps, Jerry. And we've also asked if it's possible to get a copy of Jeff's presentation. He'd like to follow up on the references you listed. Jeff, you put your references are all already put in our meeting notes. Is that correct?
I am not sure.
Okay.
I sent a reference sheet to Angeli, I believe, and I'm not sure, you know, how we want to disperse that.
Okay. So we will have to follow up with you on some of those specifics later, Jerry. But I think we've answered all of the questions that have come through our chat, Oh, I did just get a note from Angeli behind the scenes saying, yes, she has all of your references, Jeff, and this follow-up will go out tomorrow. So with that, I would like to just thank each of you for participating. I know you're all busy men, and I appreciate your willingness to come and speak to fellow pastors and church leaders about what it takes to have a homeschool group in their church and why. And I'm just amazed. I mean, that each of your most important points were identical. Is that ability, don't overlook the ability to minister to these families. So with that, I would just like to say thank you so much for joining us, and God bless your day. And I know Angeli's going to be coming back in with another final screen here for us. But I just, well, maybe she's not. Let me just go ahead and say thank you, each of you, Jeff Byers, Pastor Aaron Rue, and Jeff Pisano for joining us. And I hope that each of our attendees were blessed. Of course, if you have any other questions, if something comes up, you can call us at, I'm just going to say our phone numbers right now because I think we're having technical difficulty. Call at 562-864-2432 or email us at CHEAinfo, that's CHEAINFO, at cheaofca.org, CHEAOFCA.org. We'll look forward to serving you in any way that we can. And with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you, gentlemen, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.